Hi, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Our topic for tonight is Congress is a factory for neoliberal outrages. Uh, and we will go through a number of these outrages tonight. I will start by sharing a piece from Common Dreams. Mm, Oh, seems like I have the wrong article up. I'm afraid. Okay. Excuse me a second. Here's the piece from Common Dreams I was looking for. Okay, this piece is from today. It's by Jake Johnson. On what planet is that fiscally responsible, unquote? GOP spending cuts would kill 500,000 jobs. Seems like the Republicans have proposed a spending bill that, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, according to their analysis, their modeling, for the coming fiscal year would kill 500,000 jobs and would hinder economic growth, findings that Democrats seized on as further evidence of the GOP's, quote, willful disregard for the well-being of Americans, unquote. CBO examined the potential economic impacts of Republicans' Limit, Save, Grow Act, the LSGA legislation that the GOP-controlled House passed in late April amid a debt ceiling crisis that the party manufactured. The White House and GOP leaders later struck a deal that included caps on discretionary spending for the next 2 fiscal years, but Republicans have spent the past several weeks proposing cuts that are more in line with the LSGA, which took aim at Medicaid, federal food assistance, and other critical programs. According to the CBO, the Republican bill's far-reaching spending cuts would result in 0.5% lower GDP growth next year, which would correspond to reductions in employment. CBO analysis indicates that roughly 500,000 workers would lose their jobs in 2024 if the LSGA became law. Quote, employment would remain below the level in CBO's forecast through 2027, the analysis notes. Sheldon Whitehouse, chair of the Senate Budget Committee, and the lawmaker who requested the CBO assessment, said in a statement that, quote, these new cuts, in addition to being wildly unpopular, are shown to inflict widespread economic pain and drag down American economic growth. At this point, I have to say that in general, I don't trust the CBO assessments. Before things, I don't mean to support any Republican arguments here because they're what they predict is going to happen is usually a pack of lies anyway. But uh, I am a constant critic of the modeling, okay, of CBO. They are incapable of predicting accurately even 4 or 5 months out. And certainly when it comes to a whole year out, they are, and as far out as 2027, uh, they just are incapable, okay, of bringing it out. On the other hand, I have no doubt that these Republican cuts would cause pain and would inflict widespread damage to the economy. After all, that's the Republican purpose. Okay, especially at this point, they want to elect a Republican in 2024. They don't want Joe Biden to have a favorable economy on his side. And that's what this is about. This is the rough and tumble, okay, of politics. Uh, and neither side cares who they hurt. Sheldon Whitehouse, Democratic senator, said, quote, Republicans showered the wealthy with budget-busting tax giveaways, then claim to care about the deficits, unquote. And quote again, said Whitehouse. In their anti-government, pro-polluter crusade, the MAGA Republicans have no problem harming workers and families as collateral damage. On what planet is that fiscally responsible? And that's true. That is right on. On what planet is it fiscally responsible? In general, it is not fiscally responsible, however, to pass any legislation based on what that will do to the debt to GDP ratio or to the size of the national debt. Neither of these particular statistics is relevant to the fiscal sustainability of the government. Uh, what is fiscally responsible is a government that will spend for the public purpose however much it has to spend, to achieve that without any concern for the level of the debt or the level of the debt to GDP ratio. Those numbers do not mean anything. They are fictions. They are based on the assumption that the only way the government can spend is if it taxes first or borrows money first. And that is simply not true. The kind of government, the United States is, a monetarily sovereign government, uh, is able to create its own money for spending without either borrowing or taxing. Uh, what borrowing or taxing does is to drain money out of the private sector, and that does have an effect on inflation, one way or the other. But it's not about actually having the money for spending. So the analysis comes as Republicans are pushing ahead with government funding bills that would slash spending on infrastructure, education, climate action, the Social Security Administration, and more. The federal government could shut down at the end of September if Congress doesn't pass funding legislation. So the GOP is again trying to create a harmful crisis where it can extract concessions out of the Democrats. The Freedom Caucus of the Republican Party is pulling for this and the Freedom Caucus has the votes to remove Speaker McCarthy from office. And so they're basically dictating some legislation that is relatively vicious. And there's a game, being played there. They control only the House. So they'll pass things out of the House that will be very damaging. They'll be hit by the Democrats for that. It's part of the political struggle. It's going to damage them actually politically, but Kevin McCarthy has to do it because he's vulnerable to the Freedom Caucus, which can put him out of the speakership, at any time. So that's what, is going on here. This legislation, of course, will not pass. And the reason why it will not pass is because the Senate is going to block it. The danger is, though, that there will be damaging compromises that will be struck before a funding bill is passed. Quote, even by the low standards of Congress in 2023, it's shocking how quickly House Republicans ripped up their end of the bargain that steered the country clear of default last month. That was said by Senator Ron Wyden, the Democrat of Oregon, chair of the Senate Finance Committee. He also said we ought to take this as a clear indication that Republicans cannot be trusted to stand by any of their commitments, especially when it comes to protecting Medicare and Social Security. That's, again, another true statement, this time by Ron Wyden. Quote, right now, wages are up, unemployment is down, and inflation has cooled off, but the plans House Republicans are committed to passing will destroy 500,000 jobs and slam the brakes on our economy. Wyden added, it's a recipe for slow growth and financial hardship for families all across the country. Now, why is this a neoliberal thing? What does it have to do, with neoliberalism? Because the Republicans want to enact this as austerity budgeting, which they are claiming is fiscally responsible because it's going to cause deficit spending, they say, and the deficit spending is going to raise the national debt and raise the debt, to GDP ratio. Now, that kind of argument is a neoliberal argument. It's an argument they've been making now for decades. They want austerity, all the time because the debt. They terrorize over the debt. They don't care that austerity literally kills, that people will die because of the legislation they are going to pass. So, let's get on to some other instances of neoliberal thinking in relation to the Congress. Here's another piece, again, from Common Dreams. Yes, I was spending my time at Common Dreams today trying to find examples, instances of neoliberal thinking that was harming to the country. So here's another piece. In this one, a union warns GOP proposal would devastate the Social Security Administration. This is by Jake Johnson also. It's from today as well. A union representing more than 750,000 federal employees warned Wednesday that the House GOP's proposed cuts to the Social Security Administration for the coming fiscal year will deeply harm the already strained and understaffed agency potentially forcing it to close offices and slash service hours. Such impacts would, quote, devastate the agency's ability to serve the American public. Julie Tippins, legislative director of the American Federation of Government Employees, wrote in a letter to the top members of the House Appropriations Committee. Last week, a Republican-controlled Appropriations Subcommittee approved a legislation that would cut the Social Security Administration's SSA budget for fiscal year 2024 by $183 million below the currently enacted level. President Joe Biden's 2024 budget proposal, by contrast, called for a $1.4 billion increase for the agency. So the discrepancy between those two is roughly $1.6 billion that separate the Democrats from the Republicans in terms of what they wanted for this agency. The full House Appropriations Committee still must approve the measure, one of a dozen government funding bills that Congress is looking to pass by September 30th to avert a government shutdown. Tippins noted that, quote, seniors and disabled individuals already face long lines to get help at field offices, unquote, conditions that would only worsen under the GOP proposal. Someone calling SSA's helpline faces an antiquated phone system that frequently drops their calls, where the average wait time is 35 minutes, Tippins said. So clearly, these cuts are very, very damaging. Quote again, more cuts to SSA will result in a rapid increase of wait times, force the Social Security Administration offices to close in many communities, and reduce service hours to the public, unquote. Of course, this would all be very damaging to the Biden administration, which is what the GOP is trying to do. Why are they trying to do that? Again, it's about ideas that spending needs to be cut. That it needs to be cut because it's going to add to the deficit, it's going to add to the debt, and that's going to add to the debt to GDP ratio. So the Republicans call it fiscally irresponsible. They want a bipartisan commission to examine ways to cut Social Security. Of course, tomorrow they will make a statement somewhere saying it's a lie that they're trying to cut Social Security. Well, it is not a lie that they're trying to cut Social Security. And of course, Kevin McCarthy wants to create a bipartisan commission so that Republicans and Democrats can hold hands so no one will be blamed for cutting Social Security, which of course seniors like very much, and they hate cuts to Social Security. So in order to really pass bills that will get through to cut Social Security, the two parties have to hold hands. There has to be bipartisan stuff. Thus, the origin of the saying, watch out for the bipartisan legislation. Once they start talking about that, keep your hands on your wallets, because they're plotting to take money away from you. So Representative John Lawson, Democrat of Connecticut, a leading proponent of Social Security expansion in the House, warned last week that Republicans' attack on the Social Security Administration is their, quote, first step, unquote, towards cutting benefits. Of course, he's quite right. He speaks also about years of underfunding combined with the COVID-19 pandemic have significantly worsened Social Security Administration service and led to lengthy delays during a time, of rising need. That's part of Republican strategy, too. If they can cut things so there are delays, so the Social Security office is not performing well, so people are frustrated by it, they make Social Security less popular. They hope to create a groundswell where the ordinary citizens will turn to the idea of privatizing Social Security so that it will be more efficient. This is what they've been trying to do for years. But these things are not about privatizing Social Security, they're about reducing the support for Social Security. So you shouldn't be fooled by that. I'm now joined by Dee Pierce, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, who is joining me, okay, as usual. Hi, Dee. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Yes, we went overtime tonight, but it was just so powerful. Just the time went by so fast.
Yeah, it was. It was powerful. So, what we're doing here is we're going over some articles from Common Dreams that illustrate uh, the Republican attempts to bring austerity into the picture once again and to use the neoliberal justifications of how serious it is, how the debts uh, that we have, we being okay, the U.S. government, how those debts are so serious that we just can't have any more debt and we can't have any more deficits. Therefore, we have to cut various kinds of spending, including Social Security spending. Their favorite target is to cut
Mhm.
Social Security spending. So I've been going over the second article about that and quoting John Larson, who is a Connecticut representative. He's a Democrat and one of the strongest supporters of Social Security in Congress. And he talked about years of underfunding combined with the COVID-19 pandemic have significantly worsened Social Security Administration service and led to lengthy delays during a time of rising need, unquote. He also says the House Republican bill will only pile onto this problem, making it harder and harder for Americans to access their earned benefits, unquote. Larson says, I'll continue to fight for the Social Security Administration to have the funding, staff it needs to improve customer service to the American people. And I've been pointing out to people that the whole motive for cutting here is not really fiscal responsibility. It's to worsen the services the SSA is providing to people so people will become dissatisfied with the present Social Security system. So there will be more support for the end goal of the Republicans, which is to privatize Social Security, turn over the Social Security Trust Fund, which is not a trust fund, doesn't really have any money in it, to Wall Street. But of course, the House Republicans will find a legislative way to create $2.8 trillion to give to Wall Street, so Wall Street can then do Social Security for all of us, and we can all suffer the consequences, okay, of that. That, my friends, is one of the major neoliberal goals the Republicans have been pursuing for a very, very long time. So here is a third piece. We're moving through things pretty quickly here tonight. I think that's good. But here's a third piece from Common Dreams. This one is about yes, the five alarm fire. So let me go to the top of this. There's Kevin McCarthy holding out his hand for some reason. I don't know why. Uh, quote, five alarm fire, unquote. GOP adds over 200 poison pills to House spending bills. we'll talk here about what these poison pills are, but the basic point here is that there's a process going on inside of the Republican Party. Generally, the general goal is to make policies that are going to create austerity and harm people. That is, okay, the neoliberal goal being pursued by the GOP. But the Republicans are disunited about how much austerity, how much harm they want to do to regular people. Uh, some of the Republicans in the House are much more vigorous about that, okay, than others. So they went through this, legislative process where people were adding things to the House spending bills, and that's where the 200 poison pills were coming from. This article is by Brett Wilkins, July 17th, 2023, a few days back. A coalition of advocacy groups on Monday sounded the alarm on the more than 200 so-called, quote, poison pill, quote, riders attached by Republican U.S. lawmakers to House spending bills in recent weeks in a bid to block funding for a dizzying range of progressive policies and programs. According to the Clean Budget Coalition, which is made up of nearly 260 advocacy groups, quote, at least 104 poison pill policy riders were added to appropriation bills drafted in the U.S. House over the past week. 104 poison pill policy riders. Prior to the July 4th recess, it took 2 months for House Republicans to add more than 100 new poison pills to draft spending bills marked up in committee. The coalition noted, quote, in the past week alone, the previous total, that is the total of 104, has doubled to more than 217, unquote. Most of these measures are special favors for big corporations and ideological extremists, that's the Freedom Caucus, that have nothing to do with funding our government and could not become law on their own merits, unquote, the groups added. Some of them attack women's health, some fuel political corruption, some harm our environment, and much more, unquote. I'm going to skip the tweets here. Well, there's one tweet. We must put out this 5-alarm fire, says the Coalition for Sensible Safeguards, by rejecting the inclusion of poison pills. The sheer volume of dangerous riders being included in these draft bills is an overreach and an emergency. Not surprising that the Republicans would overreach and create emergencies. That's their stock in trade. Some of the riders tracked by the Clean Budget Coalition include measures to block proposed transportation safety rules and prohibit funding for the World Health Organization for mitigating the climate, gender equality programs, and critical race theory education. Other riders target gas stove bans, funding for high-speed rail, pesticide warning labeling, wildlife protection, reproductive health care, and diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. In other words, the usual suspects are the things the Republicans want to pass to harm people. Quote, the sheer volume of dangerous riders being included in these draft bills is an overreach and an emergency, said Lisa Gilbert, Executive Vice President of the consumer advocacy group, Public Citizen, and co-chair of the Clean Budget Coalition, said in a statement. Quote, we cannot allow policy that harms regular people, threatens our rights, hurts the environment, does any number of other terrible things to ride along with the appropriations package. In other words, again, you have to note here, they have to pass an appropriations package by the end of the fiscal year, September 30th, or the government is in danger of shutting down or partially shutting down. Okay? So there's a necessity to do that. And the Republicans make use of that particular necessity to add all these riders, okay, to the spending bill. Uh, and then they're going to try to extract concessions in the form that they'll say to the Democrats, well, we'll go along, give you the votes needed to pass the spending bills, okay, if these particular riders survive. And maybe they'll pick 5 to 10 of those riders that are particularly damaging and try to force the Democrats to accept that. If the Democrats won't accept it, there will be stalling and stalling and stalling. And then there's going to be the hard game where the Democrats won't accept the riders. Okay, and the Republicans are going to insist on the riders. And there's going to be finger pointing on both sides. And of course, the Democrats not being as principled, not being so hot when it comes to defending the people, they will give way on some of the riders for the sake of getting a spending bill passed. And when people object, they'll say, we couldn't do anything else. We wouldn't be able to pass a spending bill. The government was going to shut down. Look, it's the GOP's fault. Yes, it will be the GOP's fault, but also with regard to some of the riders, okay, the Democrats won't care that some of these riders are going to hurt some people, and they're going to sacrifice the interests of some people to get the spending bill passed. They'll try to blame it on the Republicans. But, everybody in Washington has been playing this blame game for a long time. And what we've learned from the blame game is that both sides are to blame. They set up these particular situations, and the overall truth of the matter is they're not delivering on the public purpose, largely because they believe in austerity to some degree, and largely because they believe in this notion of fiscal responsibility as reducing spending and reducing the debt okay, to GDP ratio. So I can tell you, on the Democrat side, they're going to give up something. Some of these poison pill riders are going to survive. Okay. And the Republicans know it. That's why they put in 217 of them, so they have plenty to bargain with. David Shadburn, Senior Government Affairs Advocate at the League of Conservation Voters, a Clean Budget Coalition member, said earlier this month that, quote, House Republicans continue using the same tired playbook. They're hijacking must-pass bills with harmful poison pill riders that neither the public nor Congress support, but which benefit their polluter donors. So, quote, just as Republican leaders held the full faith and credit of the United States hostage to make it easier to pollute, now they're proposing riders to green light pipelines. Thanks, honey. To block clean air and water regulations, to stall clean energy deployment, and prohibit the federal government from addressing long-standing inequities, Shadburn added. These must-pass spending bills are already loaded down with harmful poison pill riders that need to be removed. The last thing Congress should do is to add any more. So, okay, this article is telling you that there's a fight that's going on. The stage has been set for the fight. The fight is going to come to fruition over the next month or two. Uh, we hope. We hope there's not going to be a shutdown. We hope that the Democratic Senate will counter most of the poison pills. But we know some of them are going to get through. We know some people are going to be hurt because we know the Democratic donors, as well as the Republican donors, are for some of these poison pills. And they're going to compromise on them and let them through because they're things the donors want. So that's what's going on in relation to Congress being a factory for neoliberal outrages. Hey, Lisa, how you doing? As always, if you'd like to join us, you are very welcome to do so.
Yes, please join us.
It's always good to see you here. I sent you the link a few days ago. You can come in as an administrator, okay, if you like. Hope you're having a great time up in Erie. Okay, so the fourth piece I wanted to go over is not about the ruinous activities of neoliberalism here in the United States, but rather about some of the neoliberal activities in the international system that are wreaking havoc. I was actually surprised to see this piece, okay, in Common Dreams. You'll see why in just a minute. Here's a demonstrator. It looks kind of like Nico House, doesn't it? But anyway, saying debt is a tool of colonialism, and that sign speaks truth. What I was surprised about was an objection to this was coming from the UN chief. Forcing poor nations to prioritize debt payments over social investments is a, quote, disaster, unquote, says the chief of the UN, Secretary General Antonio Guterres. This piece was by Kenny Stansel, and it was from July 12th. Here is neoliberalism in the international sphere, as practiced by the United States and its coalition of powers. Antonio Guterres warned Wednesday that, quote, half our world is sinking into a development disaster fueled by a crushing debt crisis, unquote, and called for urgent fiscal relief. Citing a new report published by the UN Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy, and Finance, the GCRG, Guterres pointed out that some 3.3 billion people, almost half of humanity, live in countries that spend more on debt interest payments than on education or health, unquote. That's a really striking statistic, a striking fact. spending more on debt interest payments than on education or health. That is huge. Quote, and yet, because most of these unsustainable debts are concentrated in poor countries, they are not judged to pose a systemic risk to the global financial system, unquote. Said Antonio Gutierrez. I quote again, this is a mirage. And he's quite right. In his words, quote, 3.3 million people is more than a systemic risk, it is a systemic failure. Markets may seem not to be suffering yet, but people are. As the UN detailed in a separate Wednesday report, the COVID-19 pandemic, wars, and the fossil fuel-driven climate emergency have pushed an additional 122 million people into hunger worldwide since 2019, with an estimated 735 million people suffering from a lack of food as of last year. In terms of nutrition, more than 3.1 billion people around the globe were unable to afford a healthy diet in 2021. Nearly the same number who live in nations compelled to prioritize debt repayment over social welfare. I was so surprised that the head of the UN would say that. And I think it's just a very good sign that as an organization, they are starting to recognize that the debt cannot be paid. It has to be forgiven. It has to be eliminated. It prevents 3.3 million people from developing and becoming prosperous. It means their nations are a constant source of instability in the world economy and in the international political system. Quote again, some of the poorest countries in the world are being forced into a choice between servicing their debt or serving their people. Quote, they have virtually no fiscal space for essential investments in the Sustainable Development Goals or the transition to renewable energy. I'm not going to go through that particular tweet. Okay, the domestic and external debts of governments have been rising for decades, and cascading crises in recent years triggered an acceleration of this trend, the GCRG analysis observes. Global public debt hit a record high of 92 trillion in 2022, of which low and middle income countries hold roughly 30%. Now, I have to emphasize here what's very important. Okay. Most of the countries holding this public debt are not monetarily sovereign countries. They are countries that cannot repay the debt in their own currencies. Mostly, they have to repay their debts, okay, in dollars, because the loans were originated in dollars from places like the Inter-American Development Bank, IADB, the World Bank, the IMF. Those are like the three main sources. They lend to people in dollars or maybe in pounds, but in hard currencies that these debtor nations cannot create themselves. They have to trade to get hard currencies to pay these debts back. The interest rates are reasonably high in most cases, and they simply cannot repay the debts, and things get worse and worse every year. Public debt has increased at a faster rate in the global south than in the global north over the past decade, due to growing development financing of needs made worse by the coronavirus, cost of living, and climate crises, and because, quote, an unequal international financial architecture makes developing countries' access to financing inadequate and expensive. So Gutierrez is talking about this, okay, as a crisis, and it is, okay, a debt crisis. It's a debt crisis caused by neoliberalism, caused by the Washington consensus, caused by the terms of these loans. But there maybe is a way out. And that way out, which I've talked about before, is the coming together of the BRICS nations. They now have a development bank. It's capitalized to a greater extent than any of the IMF or the World Bank, okay, the IADB. I forget the exact figure, but I think it's something like it's between $50 billion and $100 billion to capitalize the BRICS Bank. They can and do and will make new loans to the countries, okay, in need, and they will not require the repayment of loans in dollars. They're going to require the repayment of loans in other countries. The interest rates, okay, are going to be lower. This is not something mentioned by Gutierrez here at all. But since these debts cannot be paid, the temptation will be there for the countries holding this debt to default on the debt or to negotiate down, okay, the debt. In previous years, it was possible for countries that were trying to do that to have the international monetary authorities sanction them in some way and ultimately force them, okay, to pay. But with the BRICS Development Bank coming into the picture, okay, increasingly the developing countries will be able to turn to the BRICS Bank for loans at very good terms. That will allow them to keep on developing, to grow stronger, to become sustainable in certain key areas, and that should allow them to negotiate down the debt that was created by the neoliberal period, the debt, okay, in dollars. Now, this may be a source of international tension with a possible recourse to military punishment for the countries that are not paying their debts. That's a possible source of future armed conflicts. I'm just saying that could possibly happen. Depends on how things play out. The point I'm trying to make here with respect to this article is that the UN chief is not talking about the possible effect of the debtor countries having an alternative to Western capital. And he perhaps ought to begin to talk about that. I'm sure the developing countries themselves are aware of it. More and more of them are lining up with BRICS and with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and they'll be joining the alternative bloc of nations that we see forming now. I can't say how this is going to play out, but it's going to lessen the pressure on poorer nations to prioritize debt repayments over social welfare. I think that's important. It speaks to the coming end of neoliberalism in international politics as well. Okay, do you have any comments at this point?
I was going to say, yeah, we did cover that the other night when we were covering Honduras.
Yes.
And yes, and we talked about that, one of the articles from Al Jazeera, and it had about the same thing. It talked about what Guterres had said, and talking about African countries and, some South American countries.
Yeah,
And yeah, and it's
we
exactly
talked
what you
about
said.
that. We talked about that on Around the World with Dee and Friends.
Yeah, on Saturday we talked about it.
Right. And we also talked about the formation of the alternative bloc and what effect that might have, on the their nations also.
Hmm.
But I wanted to talk about it again in the context of the Guterres statements
Yes.
and his awareness of the problems, that their nations have and how serious they're going to become, or they are becoming, I should say.
But China has been helping, like we've talked about before. China's been helping Africa and working with Africa, and they work with different countries to settle the issue, to try to figure out how they can best work together for the benefit, of everybody.
Mm. Yes, that
Well,
will
like you
be.
said, this has to stop with the IMF. I mean, it's like a bunch of gangsters.
Yes, they do act like a bunch, of gangsters, and they put some military pressure on countries also. I know that there were military threats against Argentina, in previous years, if they didn't conform and continue to pay their debts. Okay, I know Argentina has been trying to find a way out. I think I've mentioned this before also. There's a dynamic that goes on here, especially, in Latin America, where you have this alternation of governments between, right wing governments, and left wing governments. And what happens is the right wing governments come in and they borrow money from the neoliberal institutions, from the IMF and the IADB and the World Bank. And they incur these huge debts, which the right wing governors, the right wing governors get that money, usually in dollars, into their country. And of course, right wing regimes have been known to loot. In other words, the rulers get rich off the loans, and they don't really fulfill the ostensible purposes of the loans in terms of creating greater capacity for their countries. Since they don't, they're then thrown out of office. And the leftists come in wanting to reform things. But what they find is they're facing huge debts, which the neoliberal institutions are forcing them to repay. So they can never make as much social progress as they want to make unless they get the neoliberal institutions off their backs. Now, certain nations have been able to do that, specifically Bolivia has been able to do that. And also, Venezuela has been able to do that. But then they're subject to economic sanctions, which have had pretty horrific effects in Venezuela, certainly. That's a very extreme case of that.
But even now with Lebanon, the EU is threatening sanctions on Lebanon if they don't get a government together. They want them to take a loan.
Yes.
And they're going to be holding elections soon in Lebanon. But
Right.
still, this threat, they're in such economic bad shape. And I wish that just BRICS would get themselves involved in helping Lebanon instead of going with the IMF.
Yes, I wish for that too, because they'll get a much better deal from BRICS. And then they will be able to develop and start to uh, fulfill, the needs of their people. And that would be very, very good. I have one more thing to go through, I believe.
Okay.
Let me see which one that is. Oh, yes. I think this is important. Uh, what's been going on, in the neoliberal Congress is that Congress has been involved in insider trading. This one is also from Common Dreams. It's a picture of Senator Gillibrand, up there. Kirsten Gillibrand, and I believe the woman in the background, the hair in the background, I think probably belongs to Debbie Stabenow. I seem to recognize her hairdo. I think I do anyway. But the headline is Bipartisan Bill Would Ban Government Officials from Stock Trades. Now, they've been doing stock trades now for a long time, and they have insider information. In fact, the people in Congress, by taking certain votes, can determine which industries are likely to prosper and which industries are not. The Congress people have information about that. So they can make a pretty good bet on stock trades in certain industries that they've created favorable conditions for themselves. So they've been able to stock trade. They're allowed to stock trade. Do this kind of thing because they advance basically neoliberal justifications, like Nancy Pelosi recently said. Well, all we're doing is going into the free market. We're just making use of the free market. Surely there's nothing wrong with that. Why can't we do that? Why is that bad? Anyway, this article is by Brett Wilkins. I'll go through it and we'll get to some of these issues. A bipartisan pair of U.S. senators on Wednesday introduced a bill that would ban stock trading by federal officials, including members of Congress, whose median net worth is around 8 times greater than the median U.S. Households. The Ban Stock Trading for Government Officials Act, introduced by Senators Kirsten Gillibrand and Josh, who's Democrat of New York, and Josh Hawley, a Republican, he's a Missouri Republican, would bar federal lawmakers, senior executive branch officials, their spouses, and dependents from owning or trading stocks. Quote, sunlight is the best disinfectant. It is critical that the American people know that their elected leaders are putting the public first, not looking for ways to line their pockets, Senator Gillibrand said in the statement. And quote again, this bill is the most substantive bipartisan effort to date, and I'm going to work hard alongside Senator Hawley to get it signed into law. So, of course, she's trying to pull the mantle of bipartisanship around this bill. In other words, many people in Congress believe that if a bill is bipartisan, it's somehow better than a bill that's not bipartisan. Uh, so, this is the Ban Stock Trading for Government Officials Act. Applies to the members of Congress, the president and vice president, the senior executive branch officials, and their spouses and dependents. Hashtag Ban Stock Trading Act. It bans them from holding or trading individual stocks. Hawley asserted that, quote, politicians and civil servants shouldn't spend their time day trading and trying to make a profit at the expense of the American public, but that's exactly what so many are doing. Yeah, the fact that they have inside trading information, of course, uh, actually hurts other people because when all people come to the same market, theoretically, no one is supposed to have any advantages. They're all supposed to be equal, okay, in the market, especially in terms of access to information. There's also a self-fulfilling aspect, okay, of markets. If people see that certain choices, okay, are good in the market, then they follow the leader. Okay, so if
Hello? Hello?
huh? Okay, so if you have inside information and you know what to do first and you get in first, you're likely to profit more than some follower that gets in, okay, at a later time. So you are getting an unfair advantage in that sense in trading in the market. So Congress people have an unfair advantage, okay, for that reason. And that is why they shouldn't be allowed to trade in the market. Anyway, the proposed legislation would impose penalties and fines for executive branch stock trading, mandate reporting of federal benefits, boost transparency and financial disclosures, and increase transaction reporting penalties under the Stop Trading Congressional Knowledge Stock Act. Enacted in 2012, the Stock Act requires members of Congress to file annual financial disclosures in order to identify and take action when government officials use their position of influence for personal gain. However, critics have long called the law largely toothless, while demanding more stringent safeguards against self-dealing by members of Congress. The Gillibrand-Hawley bill is the latest in a series of bills that would ban members of Congress and their families from owning or trading shares, including the Ban Congressional Stock Trading Act, the Transparent Representation Upholding Service and Trust in Congress, the Trust Act, the Ending Trading and Holdings in Congressional Stocks, the Ethics Act, and the Bipartisan Restoring Faith in Government Act. And here's a tweet from someone called Quiver Quantitative at QuiverQuant. Says, I've been writing code to analyze politicians' stock trading since 2020. Here's a graph showing how much money different members of Congress have traded during that time. A little bar at the bottom is the median U.S. household income shown for scale. So you can see that the insiders in Congress, all of those who've been doing stock trading, are doing better than the median household income from their stock trading. So there it is, statistics presented in a graph by Quiver Quantitative. Let us see. I opened it up in Twitter. Josh Gottenheimer of New Jersey, who's a Democrat, a very conservative Democrat, has made a huge amount in his stock trading, much more than anybody else. Second person was Kelly Loeffler of Georgia, who also made a fortune, but about, I would say, 25% less than Gottheimer. Then number three, of course, is what you'd expect. That was Nancy Pelosi of California, who made about half of what Gottheimer made, maybe a little more than half. But I'm not going to read out, okay, all the names here, but you can go to Twitter. What I think I'm going to do here is copy this. I'm going to put it in the comments so you can have access to this. It's quite illuminating in terms of the money people have made. So, okay, I'm adding that now, and you should be able to click on it, okay, and get to that. Meanwhile, I'm going to go back to the article, see if we're back. No, somehow that's still there. I actually deleted the thing. I don't know why it's still showing, but I'll remove it and I'll go back to the article. Hey, D, you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay.
Yes,
good.
I had to turn my mic off for a bit.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so to go on with the article, I don't think I'm sharing it quite yet. There it is. So there we go. The senator said in a statement that 1 in 3 members of Congress whose median net worth, according to Open Secrets, was just over $1 million in 2020, compared with 121,700 for the median U.S. household, traded stocks between 2019 and 2021. They also noted that 1 in 7 lawmakers violated the Stock Act by not properly disclosing trades, while more than 3,700 transactions during the aforementioned 2-year period potentially posed conflicts of interest, which of course we would expect from allowing these particular stock trades. So this bill would prohibit stock trades. A survey done. Do you favor or oppose the proposal to prohibit members of Congress in the House and Senate and the family that lives with them from trading stocks in individual companies? They would still be allowed to buy or sell shares of mutual funds or index funds that include stock, okay, in but numerous companies. So, on a national level, 86% favored such a law, favored such a proposal. Okay. The figure for Republicans was 87%. The figure for Democrats was 88%. The figure for independents, okay, was 81%. So that's very interesting. It's very, very high rates of approval for such a law. If you look at it from the standpoint of blue congressional districts versus red congressional districts, 85% in both the blue and the red are in favor of such a law. The people don't want the members of Congress to be stock trading. They all recognize the danger. They all recognize that it's not good for the public. They all recognize that it's corrupt. That's basically what we're seeing here. So that stock trading was neoliberal corruption, okay, in action. And there are now bills to control it. And this one bill that was just introduced by Kirsten Gillibrand and by Josh Hawley is trying to eliminate it. Will it pass? Okay, I don't know. Uh, of course, in the Senate, it has the filibuster to get around. If it goes to the House, I wonder whether the leadership of the House is going to be in favor of this, because Nancy Pelosi is not the only member of the House who was talking about the importance of free markets and why shouldn't the Congress people be able to invest in a free market, which was one of the most ridiculous excuses I've ever heard from anybody. But this seems to be a kind of neoliberal justification for this corruption in Congress. I have to note that while stopping the stock trading is certainly something that reduces the corruption, okay, in Congress, because it reduces the likelihood that people in Congress will vote for certain bills because they think those bills are going to directly benefit them through stocks that they own in certain companies. Okay, it's also true that this does nothing with respect to the donor problem, okay, in campaigns. That seems to be the most serious problem, okay, in determining whether bills valued by the public, as opposed to whether bills valued by the donors can pass the Congress. And this does nothing about that. And of course, from all the other streams we've done, you know that from our point of view, the key reform that has to occur in our political system to let anything of value happen is to get rid of the donor money. And this is interesting. It's good, okay, in a limited way, but it doesn't make things fundamentally change, as Joe Biden is fond, okay, of saying. So, Dee, any more comments?
The money issue, as you've stated, is so crucial. We see it in every area.
Yeah, we just saw it in the behavior towards the president of Israel when he came to speak to the Congress. He was doing something. He was basically talking nonsense, and he got standing ovations from most of the Congress and the approval of a resolution uh, by all members of the Senate except for one, and all members of the House except for 9 members of the House. You know, and the resolution basically was nonsense.
It was.
Okay, it basically said, okay, it was a resolution for the United States to always stand behind Israel and not but criticize Israel, no matter what Israel does, forever.
Exactly. Right. And that Israel is not racist or apartheid.
Yes, okay, it asserted that. And of course, everybody else in the international system thinks that Israel is racist and apartheid, except for the Israeli people themselves. And we, of course, have endorsed that and have said we stand behind them forever. Now, it's good this is only a congressional resolution, not part of a constitutional amendment, because if it's a congressional resolution, it does not bind the next Congress or even this Congress, 6 months but down the road. But still, Okay, it's a bunch of nonsense. And why is the nonsense there? Because nobody wants to offend the billionaires who are ready to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the 2024 campaign. And if things got really tough in terms of criticism of Israel, I'm sure they would be ready to spend billions to topple candidates or office holders who were criticizing Israel. So people are afraid of that, very, very afraid, and so they knuckle under. So to be fair about it, there were 9 members of Congress, 9 members of the House, okay, who opposed that. Okay, and that was good. But we also, frankly, have to remember that most of those 9 members, maybe all of those 9 members, I have to look at them more carefully, okay, are opposed by the Israeli donors anyway. Okay, and they're still winning
Yes.
because they're very popular in their districts. So uh, the Israeli donors were opposed to Jamal Bowman before he got elected because the incumbent at that time he defeated was kind of a Mr. Israel in Congress. So the donors were all in back of him, but Jamal Bowman still beat him. Uh, and similar things were true, okay, in many other cases. They tried their best to stop Summer Lee, okay, who was one of the 9 from getting elected in Pennsylvania. But in spite of them throwing many, many millions of dollars in a congressional race, they weren't able to stop her. Uh, and they've tried to get rid of the only Palestinian in Congress, specifically Rashida Tlaib, but they failed to do that in spite of throwing in many, many millions against her now in 3 different elections. I'm sure they'll pull all of the stops out in 2024 to try to get rid of her. But those 9 probably voted against this because they figured, well, they're going to come for me anyway, so I might as well say what I think.
Right.
And that's why the 9 actually voted against it.
And basically, it's the truth. I mean, you look at Amnesty International, Bethlehem. I mean, all the different groups were saying it's apartheid and a racist government.
Yes, yes. Okay, well, tomorrow, my usual Friday show, okay, is at 9 o'clock. But tomorrow I will not be doing that show because during the day at 2 o'clock Eastern Time and 12 a.m., okay, Mountain Time, okay, I will be doing, okay, an interview of some of the principles of the Healing Us Network, the group that is now supporting and that also produced the Healing Us documentary film dealing with support, okay, for Medicare for all. The problems that everybody has with the healthcare system as it exists now, and the reasons why a Medicare for all bill should be pursued. I've done a previous interview with the principals. That interview was very, very successful, okay, I think. And so this is my second interview with them, and it's on the occasion of screenings that they're doing in the Rocky Mountain area. On July 18th, that was Tuesday, they completed screening, okay, in Denver. And tomorrow, July 21st, they're going to do a screening in Salt Lake City. So, in this interview, we'll be talking about those screenings, how they went. We, of course, are doing the interview before the Salt Lake City screening. So, we'll be talking about how they think it's shaping up, how it's going to go. We're also going to talk about the impact that the Healing Us Network, okay, is having politically in their judgment, okay, at this time. Okay. The Red Berets are heavily involved in the Healing Us Network. One of the leaders in producing the film was Laura Fielding, of course, and so we will be doing the interview for them tomorrow, okay, at 2 p.m. I expect it to be a very interesting little party, and so I urge you all to come. Okay, so I did want to say that. I also want to say, please buy Dee and me coffee.
And
And
if you haven't already, please, please, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share.
right,
So you don't miss any of the shows.
right. So thank you, Dee.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for being on my show tonight as well.
Oh, it was a great pleasure. We really had fun on your show tonight.
Yes, we did, and it went by so fast.
You had to go by real fast. Okay, thanks, Dee.
And thank you, and good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
I'm sure I'll see you over the weekend sometime, Dee.
Yes, you will.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
I'm ending the broadcast now.